Hello! Welcome to the start of my Birthright Phoenix LTC. Today I'll be covering the prologue through chapter 2, as well as setting up our avatar. Female Corn gets us early Jacob rather than Felicia, which is pretty impactful once we can start reclassing after the Branch of Fate. For the initial boon, I go with plus defense to save a turn in chapter 1. For the Bane, I unfortunately have to go with minus skill, as every other Bane would cause us to miss a kill threshold or turn save. For the talent, I go with Wyvern Rider, as getting its combat and skills on Corrin or her support partner is extremely relevant to the run. The prologue is pretty much a scripted battle, but it does introduce us to some Fates-specific mechanics, like the terrain-altering Dragon Veins, as well as some very important characters. We're told to route, but the map ends after 2 turns regardless of what we do. I of course take this opportunity to have Corrin defeat the nearby enemies. She has a lot of potential as a combat lead, with average gross letting her easily reach kill thresholds on normal mode and having Wyvern access. Alternatively, she can also make for a great parrot partner thanks to her personal skill, Supportive. Regardless, getting her to level 10 by the mid-game is important, though it won't necessarily be my top priority. Here, we get to see Dragon Veins in action. I find that Birthright doesn't actually have a lot of Dragon Veins that are worth sending a unit to and taking a turn to activate, but there are some important terrain-altering ones in the early game, as well as some in the mid-game that help with consistency. Speaking of consistency, Takumi shows up turn 2 and introduces us to Attack Stance. If an unpaired unit attacks adjacent to an ally, the ally also gets to attack with a dual strike at half damage, and the lead unit gets a plus 10 hit boost. This will have a ton of applications in most every clear, whether it be for pushing damage output, boosting reliability, or maximizing weapon rank. With it, Corrin takes out the Lancer, and that's the prologue completed in 2 turns. Moving on to chapter 1, we have one last experience with not much to do, though our choice of Boon and Bane will finally pay off. The goal of chapter 1 is to defeat Xander, and that's it. In choosing the defense boon, we can survive 2 hits, taking him out on our 3rd round of combat without needing a turn at the healing tile. The skill Bane giving us 3 less hits isn't too impactful here, but it is technically lowering consistency for these first few chapters. However, if we had taken the HP or Strength Bane, then we wouldn't get this turn save. The Speed Bane gets Corrin doubled in chapter 4, and the Magic, Resistance, and Luck Banes prevent Corrin from reaching an important magic threshold later on, thanks to how I'm calculating average growths. I actually can't fully set units to their average stats between chapters until after the Branch of Fate, so some units will end up being a point higher than they're supposed to. Still, this won't really matter, as my strategies work assuming that units are on average anyways. But yeah, Corrin finishes off Xander, and that's chapter 1 completed in 4 turns. Finally, we move on to our first real battle in chapter 2. So far, enemies have been the same in all difficulty modes, but we now get to see normal mode making a difference. The goal of chapter 2 is to route, but the biggest hurdles have been nerfed, with Rinka having a brass club in place of the 1-2 range throwing club, and the 1-2 range Kodachi samurai not existing. We really don't need to use the Dragon Vein to fight in the center, and can just wrap around the sides. I tried very hard to save a turn here by going along the right, defeating Kaze on player phase, then Rinka's group on enemy phase, thanks to the lack of 1-2 range. Tragically, Kaze being given the weaker brass shuriken also gives him plus 10 dodge, so you can't rig a crit. The fastest, most consistent clear ends up being pretty similar to Lunatic, dealing with Rinka's group first in the west, then defeating Kaze's group turn 3. This chapter gives us our first recruits, the Butler, Jacob, and the Great Knight, Gunter. Gunter will be useful in these next 2 chapters, but won't stick around for Birthright. Jacob, on the other hand, has some very important contributions up to the end of the run, basically being a pre-promote with normal experience gain. This gives him solid combat at base, with his 1-2 range also making for flexible attack stance positioning, and the ability to reclass into other promoted classes right away. My goal is to get him just below level 5 by the Branch of Fate, and he gets off to a great start. The enemies this chapter target him because his skills make Corrin bulkier, and he's able to one-shot the samurai with Corrin's dual strike. He doesn't need every kill, so I just have him weaken Kaze on the final turn, letting Corrin take the kill, all while getting the plus 10 hit boost from attack stance. Jacob then finishes the final samurai on enemy phase, and that's chapter 2 completed in 3 turns. A fairly standard start, but we'll be getting some turn differences soon, for better or for worse. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.